Martha Chun stood in her small woodworking shop, running her calloused fingers across a piece of aged maple. The wood was smooth, almost like silk, and it sang beneath her touch. She had collected this particular piece 7 years ago from a tree that had fallen during a storm in her hometown. Everyone else saw firewood, but Martha saw possibility. For 15 years, she had made furniture. Chairs that people passed down through generations. Tables where families gathered for meals and celebrations. Bookshelves that held the stories people loved most. Her work was known throughout the valley for its quality and beauty. People came from 3 towns over just to commission a piece from her workshop. But furniture had never been her true dream. Martha was 52 years old, and she had wanted to build a piano for as long as she could remember. Not buy one, not restore one. Build one from scratch with her own 2 hands. The desire had started when she was a child, watching her grandmother play an old upright piano in their living room. The instrument had been in their family for generations, brought over from China by her great-great-grandfather. When Martha was 12, that piano had finally given up. The soundboard cracked beyond repair, and her family couldn't afford to fix it or buy a new one. Her grandmother cried that day. Martha had never forgotten the sight of those tears or the silence that filled their home afterward. She had made a promise to herself then. Someday she would build a piano. A real piano that would make music so beautiful it would bring joy instead of tears. The problem was that building a piano wasn't like building a chair. It was one of the most complex instruments in the world. Thousands of parts, each one needing to be crafted with impossible precision. Strings that had to be tensioned perfectly. A soundboard that had to vibrate at just the right frequencies. Hammers that had to strike with exact force. Action mechanisms. So intricate that even experienced craftspeople found them challenging. Martha had spent years studying. She ordered books from across the country. She watched every video she could find. She visited piano factories during her rare vacations, taking notes and asking questions until the workers grew tired of her curiosity. She sketched designs in notebooks that now filled an entire shelf in her workshop. Her friends thought she was crazy. Her sister had stopped asking about the piano project years ago, clearly believing it would never happen. Even her husband, Robert, gently suggested that maybe she should just buy a nice piano instead. But Martha was stubborn. She came from a long line of stubborn women who didn't give up on their dreams easily. The real challenge wasn't just the technical knowledge, it was the resources. A single piano required materials that cost thousands of dollars. The strings alone were expensive, and they had to be precisely the right gauge and tension. The hammers needed special felt that came from specific suppliers. The wood had to be carefully selected and aged for years. Martha had been saving money for a decade. Every extra dollar from her furniture business went into a special account marked Piano Project. She skipped vacations. She wore the same clothes for years. She packed lunches instead of eating out. Robert supported her, even though it meant they lived more simply than they could have afforded. By the time she turned 50, Martha had saved enough. She had the knowledge, the materials, and the determination. There was nothing stopping her except fear. What if she failed? What if she spent all that money and all that time and created something that didn't work? What if the piano she built sounded terrible? Worse than terrible, what if it didn't make any sound at all? These questions kept her awake at night. They whispered to her in the quiet moments of her day. They made her hands shake sometimes when she looked at the materials she had gathered. Robert found her one evening, standing in the workshop at midnight, just staring at the wood she had collected. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood beside her in silence for a long moment. "You've been ready for years," he finally said. "The only thing holding you back now is you." Martha leaned against him, feeling the weight of all those years of dreaming and planning and saving. "What if I'm not good enough?" she whispered. "What if you are?" Robert replied, "What if you build something amazing? What if that piano makes music that your grandmother would have loved? You'll never know unless you try." That conversation was 6 months ago. The next morning, Martha had cleared her workshop, turned away new furniture orders, and begun. The first few weeks were terrifying. Every cut of wood felt monumental. Every measurement had to be checked and rechecked. She worked slowly, carefully, often spending an entire day on a single component. The frame took 2 months to construct. The soundboard took even longer. She made mistakes. She wasted materials. She cried more than once out of frustration. There were days when she wanted to give up, to push all the pieces into a corner and go back to making simple, straightforward furniture. But every time she considered quitting, she thought about her grandmother's tears. She thought about the music that had been lost. She thought about all the years she had dreamed of this moment, so she kept going. Her workshop became a sacred space. She worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Her hands developed new calluses. Her back ached from bending over the workbench. Her eyes strained from examining tiny details under bright lights. But slowly, piece by piece, the piano began to take shape. Robert brought her meals and sat with her in the evenings, listening as she explained each new challenge she had overcome. Her sister started visiting again, curious about the progress. Even her skeptical friends began to stop by, their doubts slowly transforming into amazement as they watched the instrument emerge from raw materials. Martha was careful not to rush. She knew that piano making required patience above all else. The wood needed time to settle. The glue needed proper curing. The strings needed gradual tensioning. Every shortcut would show in the final product. As the months passed, the piano began to look real. The cabinet gleamed with hand-rubbed finish. The keys were perfectly aligned. The internal mechanisms moved with smooth precision. Martha had poured everything she knew, everything she had learned, everything she had dreamed about into this single instrument. But there was still one problem. Martha didn't know how to play the piano. She could tune it using her electronic tools and her research, but she couldn't test it properly. She couldn't know if all her work had created something truly special or just an expensive mistake. She needed a pianist, someone who could really play, who could push the instrument to its limits and show her what she had created. Finding a pianist proved harder than Martha had expected. The valley where she lived was small, and most people who played piano did so as a hobby. They could manage simple songs for church services or children's recitals, but Martha needed someone with real skill, someone who could truly test what she had built. She asked around town, but the responses were discouraging. The music teacher at the elementary school played adequately, but admitted she wasn't trained for classical performance. The church organist was talented, but specialized in organ, not piano. Several people mentioned a young man who had studied music in college, but he had moved away years ago. Martha even considered driving to the city, 3 hours away, to find a professional pianist. But something about that felt wrong. She had built this piano in her small workshop, in her small town, with her own hands. It seemed right that it should be tested here, among the people who had watched her dream for so many years. Then Robert came home one afternoon with news. He had been at the grocery store when he overheard 2 women talking. One of them mentioned that her nephew had just moved back to the valley. He had gone to a famous music school on the East Coast, had been performing in concert halls, but something had happened. The details were unclear, but he had come home and was staying with his aunt temporarily. "His name is David Kim," Robert told Martha. "Apparently he was quite successful before he came back." The woman seemed sad talking about him, like something had gone wrong. Martha's heart beat faster. A professionally trained pianist right here in town. It seemed almost too good to be true. But she also felt hesitant. If something had gone wrong in his career, would he even want to play? Would he be willing to test her piano? "Where is he staying?" Martha asked. Robert gave her the address. It was old Mrs. Kim's house on the other side of town. Martha had made a dining table for Mrs. Kim 5 years ago. The next morning, Martha drove across town, her stomach tight with nerves. The piano was nearly finished. Just a few more adjustments, a final tuning, and it would be ready. But ready for what? She needed to know if her work had been worth it. Mrs. Kim answered the door with a warm smile. She was a tiny woman in her 70s, and she remembered Martha immediately. "The table you made is still perfect," Mrs. Kim said, inviting Martha inside. "Not a single wobble. My family gathers around it every Sunday. Martha thanked her and explained why she had come. She mentioned the piano, the years of work, and her need for someone to play it properly. Mrs. Kim's smile faded slightly. "David is here," she said quietly, "but I don't know if he'll want to play. He hasn't touched a piano since he came home 2 months ago." "What happened?" Martha asked gently. Mrs. Kim sighed. "He was doing so well. Concerts, recordings, everything a musician dreams of. But the pressure got to him. He developed terrible stage fright. During an important performance, he froze completely. Couldn't play a single note. After that, every time he tried to perform, the same thing happened. His career fell apart. He came home because he didn't know what else to do." Martha felt a wave of sympathy. She understood dreams falling apart. She understood fear and failure. "Could I talk to him?" Martha asked. "I won't pressure him. I just want to ask." Mrs. Kim hesitated, then nodded. She led Martha to a small room at the back of the house. David was sitting by the window, reading a book. He was younger than Martha expected, probably in his late 20s. He had dark circles under his eyes and the look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "David," Mrs. Kim said softly, "this is Martha Chun. She has something to ask you." David looked up, polite but distant. Martha could see the wariness in his eyes. He had probably been asked about playing many times since coming home. Martha sat down across from him and told him about the piano. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She explained that she wasn't a piano maker by trade, that this was her first attempt, that she had no idea if it was any good. She told him about her grandmother, about the old piano that had broken, about the dream she had carried for 40 years. "I need to know if it works," Martha said. "Not just mechanically, but really works. If it makes music the way a piano should. I can't judge that myself. I need someone who knows." David was quiet for a long moment. "I haven't played in 2 months, he finally said. "I'm not sure I can." "This wouldn't be a performance," Martha said. "No audience. No pressure. Just you and the piano. In my workshop. No one else needs to be there." David's hands tightened on his book. Martha could see the conflict in his face. Part of him wanted to say yes. Part of him was terrified. "I'll think about it," he said. Martha thanked him and left her phone number. As she drove home, she felt uncertain. Maybe she had made him uncomfortable. Maybe she should have gone to the city after all. But 3 days later, David called. His voice was hesitant, but he agreed to come see the piano. No promises about playing it, just looking. When he arrived at the workshop, Martha could see his nervousness. His hands shook slightly as Robert introduced himself. Martha showed him around the workshop first, giving him time to relax. She showed him the furniture pieces she had made over the years, the tools she used, the wood she had collected. Then she uncovered the piano. David stopped breathing for a moment. The instrument sat in the center of the workshop, gleaming under the lights. Martha had built it in a traditional grand piano style, though slightly smaller than a full concert grand. The wood was a rich, warm brown, with natural grain patterns visible through the finish. The keys were pristine white and black. Everything looked professional, beautiful even. But looking beautiful and sounding beautiful were two different things. David walked around the piano slowly, examining it from every angle. He looked at the strings, the hammers, the pedals, the soundboard. Martha held her breath, waiting for his judgment. "The craftsmanship is incredible," David said quietly. "I've seen pianos from famous makers that don't look this good. But how does it sound?" Martha asked. David stared at the keys. Martha could see him struggling with himself. Finally, he reached out and pressed a single key. A clear, pure note rang through the workshop. David's eyes widened. He pressed another key, then another. He played a simple scale, his fingers moving slowly, carefully. The sound filled the space, rich and resonant. "Can I?" David asked, gesturing to the bench. Martha nodded, her heart pounding. David sat down, positioned his hands, and began to play a simple melody. It was nothing fancy, just a basic exercise piece, but the sound was beautiful. The piano responded to his touch with warmth and clarity. David played for 10 minutes, then 20, then an hour. His nervousness seemed to melt away. He forgot about Martha and Robert watching. He forgot about his failed performances and his broken career. There was only the music and this strange, wonderful piano that a furniture maker had built in her small workshop. When he finally stopped, there were tears on his face. "This piano," he said, his voice shaking. "It's extraordinary. I've played Steinways, Bissendorfers, all the famous makes. This is different. The tone is warmer somehow, more alive." Martha felt her own tears coming. All those years, all that work, all that fear had been worth it. David started coming to the workshop every day. At first, he would play for just an hour, simple pieces that didn't challenge him too much. But gradually, he stayed longer. He brought sheet music from his aunt's house, pieces he had performed in concert halls. Complex compositions by Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy. Martha would work on her furniture orders while he played, but she always listened. She had never considered herself particularly musical, but hearing David play her piano awakened something in her. She began to understand what her grandmother must have felt all those years ago. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after David started coming regularly, Martha noticed something interesting. The piano sounded different depending on the time of day. In the morning, when the workshop was cool, the tone was crisp and bright. In the afternoon, when sunlight warmed the wood, the sound became mellower, richer. She mentioned this to David, worried it meant something was wrong with the instrument. But he shook his head, smiling for the first time since she had met him. "That's not a flaw," he said. "That's the piano breathing, living, factory made." Pianos are so precisely controlled that they lose some of that organic quality. Your piano responds to its environment because it's made from real wood that you chose and aged yourself. It's actually remarkable. Martha felt a surge of pride. She hadn't failed. She had created something unique. As David played more, his confidence grew. The fear that had paralyzed him in concert halls seemed absent in the workshop. Martha realized it was because there were no expectations here. No critics, no audience, no pressure to be perfect. Just the music and a piano that seemed to understand him. One evening, after David had left, Robert asked Martha what she planned to do with the piano. She hadn't really thought about it. The building had been the goal. She had been so focused on completing it that she hadn't considered what came after. "I suppose I could sell it," Martha said, though the thought made her uncomfortable. After all those years of dreaming and months of building, the idea of giving it to a stranger felt wrong. "Or," Robert said carefully, "you could donate it somewhere. The community center has been wanting a piano for years." Martha considered this. The community center was the heart of their small town. It hosted events, classes, gatherings. A piano. There could bring music to everyone, not just one person. But something still felt incomplete about that plan. The answer came to her a few days later when David arrived at the workshop looking troubled. He sat at the piano but didn't play immediately. "My aunt thinks I should go back to the city," he said quietly. "Tried to restart my career. She means well, but I don't think I'm ready. Maybe I'll never be ready." Martha stopped her work and sat down across from him. "What do you want?" she asked. David's hands moved across the keys without pressing them, a ghost of playing. "I want to make music," he said, "but I can't handle the pressure of performing anymore. The stages, the audiences, the reviews. It broke something in me." "Music doesn't have to be about performance," Martha said. "My grandmother played piano her whole life, and she never performed for anyone except our family. The music still mattered. It still brought joy." "But how do I make a living?" David asked. "I spent years training to be a concert pianist. I don't know how to do anything else." Martha thought about this. An idea was forming in her mind, but she wasn't sure if it was practical or just wishful thinking. "What if you taught?" Martha suggested. "There are kids in this valley who would love to learn piano. Adults, too. I would have given anything for lessons when I was young." David looked doubtful. "Teaching isn't the same as performing." "No," Martha agreed. "It's different, but it's still music. And maybe it's music without the fear. David sat at the piano considering. Then he began to play a gentle piece that Martha didn't recognize. As he played, she could see him imagining it. A different kind of musical life here in this valley, teaching instead of performing. Over the next week, the idea grew. David talked to people around town. The response surprised him. There were at least 20 people interested in piano lessons, from children to retirees. The community center offered him space to teach, but they didn't have a piano. That's when Martha made her decision. She would donate the piano to the community center, but with a condition. David would be the primary person to use it for teaching and for his own playing. The piano would stay in the community, bringing music to everyone. David was overwhelmed when she told him. "I can't accept this," he said. "You spent years building it. It should be yours." "I built it to make music," Martha said. "It can't do that sitting in my workshop. And this way, it will make music for years to come. Decades, maybe. That's what I wanted." The community center was thrilled. They planned a small dedication ceremony for the following month. Nothing fancy, just a gathering where people could see the piano and hear David play it for the first time in a public setting. As the date approached, Martha felt increasingly nervous. Not about the piano itself, but about David. Would he be able to play in front of people again? What if his stage fright returned? What if the public setting triggered all his old fears? She shared these worries with Robert one night. He reminded her that this wasn't a concert hall. These were neighbors and friends, not critics. The setting mattered. Still, Martha worried. The night before the ceremony, David came to the workshop. He was visibly anxious, his hands shaking. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "What if I freeze again?" Martha understood his fear. She had felt similar terror when she made the first cut into her precious aged maple, beginning the piano build. The fear of ruining everything with one mistake. "Here's what I learned building this piano," Martha said. "Perfection isn't the goal. Music is the goal. If you make a mistake tomorrow, if you hit a wrong note, the piano will still be there. The people will still be there. The music will still matter." "But what if I can't play at all?" David asked. "Then you can't," Martha said simply, "and it won't be the end of the world. We'll still have the piano. You'll still teach. Maybe you'll try again another day, or maybe you won't. Either way, you're still a musician." David nodded slowly. He sat at the piano and played for an hour, working through his nervousness. Martha listened and continued oiling a chair she was finishing. The familiar rhythm of work and music filled the workshop. When David left that night, he still looked worried, but less terrified. Martha hoped it would be enough. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Martha and Robert loaded the piano carefully onto a specialized trailer they had rented. Moving the instrument was nerve-wracking. Every bump in the road made Martha's heart skip. But they had secured it properly, and it arrived at the community center without damage. The room where it would live was perfect. Large windows let in natural light. The acoustics were surprisingly good. David helped position it precisely, testing the sound from different spots in the room. People began arriving early in the afternoon. More people than Martha had expected. It seemed like half the town had come to see the piano and hear David play. The community center filled with familiar faces. Martha saw Mrs. Patterson, who had bought a rocking chair from her 10 years ago. There was Tom Willis, the grocer, with his whole family. The school principal was there with several teachers. Martha's sister came with her husband and teenage daughters. Even old Mr. Henderson, who rarely left his house, had made the journey. David stood off to the side, his face pale. Martha could see him counting people, watching the room fill, the old panic starting to creep back. She caught his eye and gave him an encouraging nod, but she wasn't sure it helped. The mayor, a friendly woman named Linda Chun, who happened to be a distant cousin of Martha's, stepped forward to make a few remarks. She talked about community, about the importance of arts in small towns, about how grateful they were to have this beautiful piano. Then she introduced Martha. Martha hadn't prepared a speech. Public speaking had never been her strength. She stood awkwardly at the front of the room, very aware of all the eyes on her. "I'm not good with words," she began. I work with wood and tools. But I can tell you why I built this piano." She told them about her grandmother, about the old piano that had broken, about a 12-year-old girl who had promised herself that someday she would bring music back. She kept it simple, honest. When she finished, several people were wiping their eyes. "And now," Martha said, "David Kim is going to play it for us. He's a wonderful pianist, and he's going to be teaching lessons here starting next month. If anyone is interested, there's a sign-up sheet by the door." She stepped back, and everyone's attention turned to David. He walked to the piano slowly, like a man approaching something that might bite. Martha saw his hands trembling as he sat on the bench. The room fell silent. David placed his hands on the keys but didn't press down. Martha could see him breathing deliberately, trying to calm himself. 10 seconds passed. 20. People began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Martha's heart sank. He was going to freeze again. All her reassurances the night before hadn't been enough. The pressure of an audience, even this small, friendly one, was too much. But then David did something unexpected. He started talking. "I used to perform in concert halls," he said quietly, not looking at the audience. "Big venues with perfect acoustics and expensive pianos. I played for critics and experts. And eventually, the pressure of trying to be perfect every single time broke me. I couldn't do it anymore." He ran his fingers silently across the keys. "But this piano is different. Martha built it with her own hands, even though she'd never built a piano before. She wasn't trying to make something perfect. She was trying to make something meaningful, something that would bring music back into the world." David finally looked up at the audience. "So I'm not going to try to play perfectly today. I'm just going to play. And if I make mistakes, that's okay. Because the point isn't perfection. The point is music." With that, he began. He chose a piece by Eric Satie, Gymnopédie No. 1. It was simple, gentle, the kind of music that didn't demand technical brilliance but required emotional honesty. The first notes floated through the room, and something magical happened. The piano sound filled the space with warmth. It wasn't the cold, precise sound of a factory-made instrument. It was alive, breathing, responding to David's touch with something that felt almost human. David did make mistakes. He stumbled over a transition about a minute in. His timing wasn't perfect in one section. But he kept playing, and somehow the mistakes didn't matter. The music still moved through the room, touching everyone who listened. Martha watched the faces around her. Mrs. Patterson had closed her eyes, swaying slightly. Tom Willis's youngest daughter was completely still, entranced. The teachers were smiling. Martha's sister reached over and squeezed her hand. David finished the piece and paused. Then, gaining confidence, he started another. This one was more complex, a chopin nocturne. His playing grew stronger, more assured. The fear that had paralyzed him in concert halls seemed to have no power here. He played for 30 minutes straight, moving through pieces of different styles and eras. Sometimes the piano's voice was gentle and contemplative. Sometimes it sang with power and passion. Throughout it all, the instrument Martha had built responded beautifully to every demand David made of it. When he finally stopped, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping enthusiastically. David looked stunned, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Martha felt tears running down her face. She had done it. After 40 years of dreaming, months of building, countless hours of doubt and fear, she had created something real. Something that made music. Something that mattered. After the formal part of the event ended, people crowded around the piano. David showed them how it worked, letting children press keys and hear the sounds. Several adults asked about lessons immediately. The community center director announced they would post a schedule for people to come use the piano for practice. An elderly man Martha didn't know approached her. He introduced himself as James Liu, a retired piano technician who had worked for a major manufacturer for 40 years. "I have to tell you," he said, "I was skeptical when I heard someone with no formal training had built a piano. But this instrument is remarkable. The voicing is exceptional. The action is smooth. The soundboard has characteristics I've only heard in very expensive hand-built pianos." He paused, studying her face. "You have a gift. Have you considered building more?" Martha was taken aback. "I never thought about it," she admitted. "This was just something I needed to do for myself." "Well, think about it," James said. "The world needs more instruments like this. Made with care instead of on an assembly line. Made by someone who understands that a piano isn't just a machine, it's a voice." After he walked away, Robert put his arm around Martha. "What do you think?" he asked. "Want to become a piano maker?" Martha looked at the instrument she had built, surrounded by people, David still playing for anyone who wanted to listen. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe, but right now I just want to enjoy this moment." They stayed until late in the evening. David played intermittently, sometimes teaching children how to position their hands, sometimes playing requests from the older folks who remembered songs from their youth. The piano never faltered, its voice remaining true and beautiful throughout. As they were finally preparing to leave, a woman approached Martha shyly. She was young, maybe in her 30s, with a baby on her hip. "My grandmother used to play piano," the woman said. "She passed away last year. I've been wanting my daughter to learn someday, in memory of her. But we could never afford a piano or lessons." She looked at Martha with gratitude. "What you did today, giving this to the community, it means families like mine can have music. Thank you." Martha hugged her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. These were the moments she had dreamed of. Not recognition or praise, but knowing that her work would touch lives she might never fully know about. On the drive home, Martha was quiet, processing everything. Robert let her have her silence, understanding that she needed time to absorb what had happened. "You know what the most amazing part is?" Martha finally said. "For years I thought building the piano was the dream. But watching David play it today, seeing people's faces, that was bigger than anything I imagined." "So what's next?" Robert asked. Martha smiled. "I don't know. Maybe I'll build another piano. Maybe I'll stick with furniture. Maybe I'll do both. But whatever I do, I know now that it's never too late to chase a dream, even if it takes 40 years. The weeks following the community center event changed everything for both Martha and David in ways neither of them expected. David's student list grew quickly. He started with 8 students and within 3 weeks had 25 people wanting lessons. Children, teenagers, adults, and even a few seniors who had always wanted to learn but never had the chance. Martha found herself stopping by the community center more often than she intended. She would tell herself she just wanted to check on the piano, make sure the humidity wasn't affecting it, verify that the tuning held. But really, she loved watching David teach. He had found his purpose again, and it showed in everything he did. One afternoon, Martha arrived to find David teaching a 7-year-old girl named Sophie. The child's feet didn't reach the pedals, and she had to stretch to reach all the keys, but she was completely focused on David's instructions. "Music isn't about playing fast or showing off," David was telling her. "It's about feeling. When you press these keys, you're telling a story." "What story do you want to tell?" Sophie thought about this seriously, then played a simple melody she had been practicing. It was hesitant and imperfect, but there was something genuine in it. David praised her effort, and Sophie beamed with pride. Martha watched from the doorway, remembering her own childhood. If she had been given the chance to learn piano after her grandmother's instrument broke, how different might her life have been. But then again, maybe everything had happened exactly as it needed to. Maybe she had needed to take the long path to get here. Later that week, James Liu, the retired piano technician, called Martha. He had a proposal that surprised her. "I have a friend in the city who owns a music store," James said. "He specializes in high-end pianos. I told him about your instrument, and he wants to meet you. He's always looking for talented builders." Martha's first instinct was to say no. She wasn't a professional piano maker. She had built one piano, and it had worked out well, but that didn't make her an expert. But Robert encouraged her to at least meet with the man. What harm could it do? He asked. You don't have to commit to anything. So the following Saturday, Martha drove to the city with Robert. The music store was in an upscale district, its windows displaying beautiful grand pianos. Martha felt out of place in her work clothes, but the owner, a distinguished man named Vincent Park, greeted her warmly. He took her to a showroom in the back where several pianos stood. These are all fine instruments, Vincent said, made by reputable companies with decades of history. But James tells me yours has something special, a quality that can't be manufactured. Martha wasn't sure what to say to that. Vincent continued, the market for truly handcrafted pianos is small but devoted. Collectors and serious musicians will pay premium prices for instruments that have character and soul. From what James described, yours might fit that category. He showed her some of the custom pianos he had sold over the years, telling her the stories behind them. There was a market for what she could create, he explained, but it was slow work. She might only build 2 or 3 pianos a year, maybe fewer. Each one would take months. But if she built them with the same care as her first, she could make a good living. The idea both excited and terrified Martha. Could she really do this? Could she transform a lifelong dream into a business? Think about it, Vincent said, giving her his card. If you decide to build another piano, let me know. I already have clients who might be interested. On the drive home, Martha and Robert talked through the possibilities. Building pianos full-time would mean giving up her furniture business or at least scaling it back dramatically. It would mean investing in more tools, more materials. It would mean embracing uncertainty. But it would also mean pursuing her passion fully, not just as a one-time achievement, but as a way of life. Martha didn't decide immediately. She spent the next week thinking, weighing options, making lists of pros and cons. She visited the community center several times, watching David teach, listening to students practice on her piano. The instrument was getting plenty of use, and it held up beautifully. One evening, she arrived just as David was finishing his last lesson of the day. A teenage boy was playing a piece he had been working on, and David was giving him feedback. Martha waited until they finished, then asked David if they could talk. They sat in the empty room with the piano between them. Martha explained Vincent's offer and her uncertainty about what to do. What's holding you back? David asked. Fear, mostly, Martha admitted. What if I can't recreate what I did with this piano? What if it was just luck? What if I build another one and it's terrible? David smiled. I used to think like that about performing. Every concert, I thought maybe this would be the time I failed. And eventually, that fear became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I did fail, over and over, because I was so afraid of failing. He touched the piano keys gently. But teaching here, playing this piano, I've realized something. The fear of failure is worse than actual failure. Actual failure teaches you something. The fear just paralyzes you. So you think I should do it? Martha asked. I think you should do what feels right, David said. But I'll tell you this, when I play this piano, I can feel that you built it with love. With purpose. That's not luck. That's skill and dedication and something deeper. If you build more pianos with that same spirit, they'll be special too. Martha sat with his words. He was right, she realized. She had spent 40 years afraid to even try building a piano. Then she had spent months building it, afraid it wouldn't work. She had been living with fear for so long that it felt almost comfortable. But comfort and growth never happened at the same time. That night, she told Robert she had made her decision. She would build another piano. Just one more to see if she could do it again. If it worked out, she would consider making it a regular part of her work. If it didn't, well, at least she would have tried. The next morning, Martha called Vincent and told him she would build another piano. He was thrilled and immediately connected her with a client, a retired surgeon who wanted a piano for his wife's 60th birthday. The budget was generous and the timeline was flexible. Perfect conditions for Martha's second attempt. She began the same way she had begun the first time, by selecting wood. But this time, she had knowledge the first piano had taught her. She knew which types of wood created the warmth she wanted. She understood how aging affected tone. She had learned from her mistakes. The building process was different this time. Still challenging, still demanding, but without the constant terror that had accompanied her first attempt. She trusted herself more. When problems arose, and they always did, she solved them with patience rather than panic. David visited the workshop regularly, bringing updates about his students and the community center piano. One afternoon, he mentioned that several of his students were progressing so well they might benefit from having pianos at home to practice on. Most families can't afford new pianos, David said. But I've been thinking, what if there was a way to help them? An idea formed between them. Martha could restore old pianos. Not build new ones from scratch, but take broken instruments and bring them back to life. It would be less expensive than building new, and it would give families access to music who otherwise couldn't afford it. Martha loved the idea. It felt like honoring her grandmother's memory in a new way, bringing broken pianos back to life just as she had always wished someone could have done with their family piano. Over the following months, Martha developed a rhythm. She worked on the commission piano for the surgeon's wife, taking her time to get everything right. Meanwhile, she started accepting old pianos for restoration, working on them in the evenings and weekends. Word spread through the valley about what she was doing. People brought her pianos that had been sitting silent in their homes for years, sometimes decades. Some were beyond saving, but many could be restored with care and expertise. David helped by testing each restored piano, making sure it was properly tuned and voiced. Together, they created a system where families who couldn't afford pianos could essentially trade, bringing Martha a broken piano in exchange for a restored one at a much reduced cost. The community center became a hub for this exchange. Martha's piano still sat in the main room, played daily by David's students. But now there was also a notice board where people could post about pianos they wanted to donate or pianos they hoped to find. A small economy of music was forming in their valley, and Martha was at the center of it. 6 months after Martha completed her second piano, something unexpected happened that would change everything again. The surgeon's wife, whose birthday piano Martha had spent months perfecting, was a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Moore. She was a retired pediatrician who had played piano her whole life but had given it up during her busy career years. When the piano was delivered to the Moore residence, Elizabeth sat down and played for 3 hours straight. Her husband called Vincent Park the next day, raving about the instrument. Vincent called Martha with an unusual request. "Elizabeth wants to write about your piano," Vincent explained. "She has a friend who writes for a national music magazine. They want to do a feature story about handcrafted instruments and the people who make them." Martha's first reaction was panic. A national magazine? That seemed like way too much attention. She was happy with her quiet work in the valley, building and restoring pianos for people who needed them. But Robert pointed out something important. More attention means more opportunities to help people like David. Think about all the musicians out there who need a second chance. All the families who want music in their homes but can't afford it. Your story could inspire others. Reluctantly, Martha agreed to the interview. A journalist named Karen Way came to the valley with a photographer. They spent 2 days with Martha, documenting her workshop, watching her work, interviewing people who owned her pianos or played them. Karen was particularly interested in the connection between Martha and David. She interviewed him extensively about how the piano at the community center had helped him recover from his stage fright and find a new purpose in teaching. "This is the heart of the story," Karen told Martha. "It's not just about building pianos. It's about building community, about how one person's dream can change multiple lives." The article came out 3 months later in a glossy magazine that featured beautiful photos of Martha in her workshop, of David teaching students, of the community center piano surrounded by children. The title was "The Piano Maker: How a Furniture Builder's 40-Year Dream Brought Music Back to a Small Town." The response was overwhelming. Martha's phone started ringing constantly. People from across the country wanted pianos. Musicians wanted to come play the community center piano. Other small towns wanted to know how to start similar programs. Vincent Park called with the news that he had a waiting list of clients willing to pay premium prices for Martha's pianos. The wait time would be at least 2 years, maybe 3, if she took all the commissions. Martha felt buried under the attention. This wasn't what she had wanted. She had just wanted to build a piano for herself to fulfill a childhood dream. Now it felt like she was being pulled in 100 directions. She confided in David one afternoon at the community center. He was between lessons, and they sat together in the quiet room with the piano that had started everything. "I don't know if I can handle this," Martha admitted. "All these people wanting pianos, wanting stories, wanting pieces of what we've created here. I'm just one person. I can't build pianos fast enough to meet the demand." David was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Maybe you're not supposed to," he finally said. "Maybe the point isn't to build pianos for everyone who wants one. Maybe the point is to keep doing what you're doing in the way you're doing it." "But I feel guilty," Martha said. "All these people reaching out, and I have to turn most of them away." "You can't save everyone," David said gently. "But you can keep making a difference in the lives you touch. Quality over quantity, remember? Each piano you build gets your full attention, your full care. That's what makes them special." Martha knew he was right, but it was hard to accept. She had spent so long dreaming of building just one piano that she hadn't considered what would happen if people wanted more than she could give. She made a difficult decision. She would only take a limited number of commissions each year, maybe 3 or 4. The rest of her time would be split between furniture work, which she still enjoyed, and piano restoration, which served her community directly. It meant turning down lucrative opportunities. It meant disappointing people. But it also meant staying true to why she had started this journey in the first place. Not everyone understood her decision. Vincent was frustrated, seeing enormous financial potential being left on the table. Some of the people on his waiting list were disappointed, even angry, that Martha wouldn't expand her operation or hire assistants. But the people in Martha's Valley understood. They had seen her journey from the beginning. They knew this was never about money or fame. It was about music and meaning and keeping a promise to a 12-year-old girl who had watched her grandmother cry over a broken piano. As Martha settled into her new rhythm, something beautiful began to happen. The story in the national magazine inspired other craftspeople. A violin maker in Oregon reached out, saying the article had encouraged him to pursue his own dream of handcrafting instruments. A woman in Maine started restoring old harpsichords. A young man in Texas began building guitars using traditional methods his grandfather had taught him. Karen Way, the journalist who had written Martha's story, followed up with another article 6 months later about this broader movement of individual craftspeople creating instruments with care and intention. She called it the New Lutherie movement, referring to the traditional craft of string instrument making. Martha found herself part of a loose network of instrument makers across the country. They shared techniques, encouraged each other, sometimes collaborated on projects. It was a community she had never expected to join, but it enriched her work in ways she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, David's teaching continued to flourish. He now had a waiting list of students and had trained 2 assistant teachers to help manage the demand. The community center piano was in use nearly every day, its voice growing richer and more resonant with time and playing. One of David's students, a teenage girl named Maya, showed exceptional promise. She had been studying with David for 8 months and was already playing at an advanced level. David started entering her in regional competitions, and she won several. Maya's success brought attention back to the valley and to the piano she played. Music educators from the city started coming to hear this instrument that was producing such talented students. Some were skeptical at first, assuming the piano couldn't possibly be as good as the stories claimed. But when they heard it, they understood. There was something about Martha's piano that inspired musicians. It wasn't just the sound, though that was exceptional. It was the story embedded in the wood, the love poured into every joint and string, the decades of dreaming that had finally manifested in physical form. A music professor from the state university came to evaluate Maya for a scholarship. After hearing her play on Martha's piano, he asked if he could play it himself. He sat down and worked through a complex Beethoven sonata, pushing the instrument to its limits. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to Martha, who had been watching from the back of the room. "I've played hundreds of pianos in my career," he said. "Concert grands worth more than most people's houses. But this piano has something I've never encountered before. It has a soul." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Most pianos are designed to be perfect instruments, mathematically precise, acoustically optimized. But perfection can be cold. This piano isn't perfect. I can hear slight variations in the voicing, minor inconsistencies in the action. But those imperfections give it character, give it life. Martha felt tears in her eyes. That was exactly what she had hoped to create, though she hadn't known how to articulate it. Not perfection, but something alive and real. The professor made an unusual request. He wanted Martha to consider building a piano for the university's music department. Not for a specific person, but as an instrument that students could learn on and faculty could use for performances. "I can't promise you fame or fortune," he said, "but I can promise that your piano would touch hundreds of lives over the years. Students who might never encounter an instrument with this kind of soul otherwise." Martha didn't answer immediately. She went home and thought about it for a week, discussing it with Robert, with David, with her sister. This would be her biggest commission yet, and it would be for an institution rather than an individual. It felt different from her other work. But ultimately, she said yes. The idea of students learning on her piano, developing their skills and passion through an instrument built with love, appealed to her deeply. It felt like an extension of what was already happening at the community center, just on a larger scale. Building the university piano took Martha nearly a year. She approached it differently from her previous instruments, knowing it would face heavy use from many different players. It needed to be robust while maintaining the warmth and character her pianos were becoming known for. She consulted with James Liu extensively, learning techniques for making joints more durable and actions that could withstand thousands of hours of playing. She selected woods that would age well, that would actually improve with use rather than deteriorate. During this time, the community center piano continued to serve its purpose beautifully. David's student Maya won a prestigious state-level competition, beating out students from much larger cities with access to expensive private instructors. When asked about her success, Maya credited both David's teaching and the piano itself. "Playing Mrs. Chun's piano taught me to listen differently," Maya explained in an interview with a local newspaper. "It's not just about hitting the right notes at the right time. It's about feeling the music, letting it come through you. That piano taught me that." Her words touched Martha deeply. This was what she had hoped for when she first started building. Not recognition or praise, but the knowledge that her work was helping people connect with music in meaningful ways. The university piano was finally completed in early autumn, 2 years after Martha had built her first instrument. The delivery day was organized as a special event. The music department invited the public, wanting to celebrate not just the piano but the story behind it. Martha was nervous as she and Robert made the drive to the university. This was different from the intimate gathering at the community center. This was a formal academic institution with high standards and expectations. What if the piano didn't meet them? What if all her work wasn't good enough? The concert hall where the piano would live was beautiful, with excellent acoustics and seating for 300 people. Martha felt small standing on the stage next to the instrument she had built, looking out at the filling seats. The music professor who had commissioned the piano, Dr. Richard Chun, gave opening remarks. He talked about the importance of handcrafted instruments, about supporting individual artisans, about bringing soul back into music education. Then he invited Martha to say a few words. Martha had never been comfortable with public speaking, but she had prepared something simple. She talked about her grandmother, about the broken piano, about the 40-year dream. She kept it brief, not wanting to take attention away from the real purpose of the day, which was the music. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Dr. Chen had invited a special guest performer, a renowned concert pianist named Jennifer Jang who was visiting the university. She would be the first person to play Martha's piano publicly. Jennifer was a striking woman in her 40s, known for her interpretations of contemporary composers. She approached the piano with obvious curiosity, examining it carefully before sitting down. The hall fell completely silent. Jennifer positioned her hands over the keys, took a breath, and began to play. She had chosen a piece by Philip Glass, repetitive and meditative. From the very first notes, something extraordinary happened. The piano's voice filled the concert hall with a warmth that made people lean forward in their seats. The sound was crystalline but never cold, powerful but never harsh. Jennifer played for 20 minutes, moving through the piece with complete control. But what amazed Martha was watching Jennifer's face. The pianist was smiling, clearly delighted by what she was discovering in the instrument. She pushed it harder in some passages, testing its limits, then pulled back to whisper-soft dynamics that the piano handled with equal grace. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But Jennifer didn't immediately acknowledge the audience. Instead, she turned to Martha and beckoned her to the stage. "This piano," Jennifer said into the microphone, "is extraordinary. I need everyone here to understand what a remarkable achievement this is. Building a piano from scratch is difficult enough. Building one that sounds like this, that responds like this, that has this much character, is incredibly rare." She looked directly at Martha. "You've created something that will inspire musicians for generations. Thank you." Martha felt overwhelmed by the praise, by the attention, by the realization that her work was being recognized at this level. But more than that, she felt grateful. Grateful that she had finally pursued her dream. Grateful for Robert's support through all the years. Grateful for David, whose playing had first proven what her piano could do. Grateful for the community that had embraced her work. After the formal presentation, people crowded around the piano. Music students wanted to try it. Faculty members examined its construction. Several professional pianists in attendance asked if they could schedule time to play it. Martha stood back and watched, feeling a mix of pride and humility. This piano, like all the others she had built, was no longer really hers. It belonged to the music it would make, to the students who would learn on it, to the countless performances it would support over the years. As the evening wound down, a young woman approached Martha shyly. She introduced herself as Sarah, a first-year piano student at the university. "I'm not very good yet," Sarah admitted. "I only started playing 2 years ago. Most of the other students have been playing since they were children. But Dr. Chen says I can practice on your piano sometimes when the advanced students don't need it." She paused, gathering courage. "I wanted to tell you that your story inspired me. I read about you in that magazine article, about how you waited 40 years to build your first piano. I'm 23 and sometimes I feel like I started piano too late, like I'll never catch up to the others." Sarah's eyes were bright with emotion. "But if you could wait 40 years and still accomplish your dream, maybe it's not too late for me either." Martha hugged her, this young stranger who understood something essential about the journey. "It's never too late," Martha said firmly. "Music doesn't care when you start. It only cares that you begin." Over the following months, Martha received regular updates from the university. The piano was being used extensively, sometimes for 8 or 10 hours a day. Instead of wearing it down, the constant playing seemed to enhance it. The wood continued to open up, the sound growing richer and more complex. Dr. Chun reported that students were requesting to practice on Martha's piano specifically, even when other high-quality instruments were available. There was something about it that inspired them, made them play better, made them connect more deeply with the music. David's teaching continued to thrive in the valley. Maya, his star student, had been accepted to a prestigious music conservatory with a full scholarship. Several of his other students were also showing exceptional progress. The community center piano, now 3 years old, had become a beloved landmark in the town. Martha continued her work, building 1 or 2 new pianos each year and restoring old ones for families who needed them. She had found her rhythm, her purpose, her place in the world. The furniture business still provided steady income, but the pianos were her passion. One evening, Robert found her in the workshop, just standing still among her tools and wood, a peaceful expression on her face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Martha smiled. "I'm thinking about my grandmother. About that broken piano that started everything. I used to see it as a tragedy, the end of music in our home. But now I wonder if it was actually a beginning. If that piano hadn't broken, maybe I never would have dreamed of building one. Maybe none of this would have happened." She gestured around the workshop, at the partially completed piano frame on her workbench, at the restored pianos waiting for delivery, at the life she had built around her dream. "Sometimes the broken things lead us to create something new," Martha continued, "something that wouldn't have existed otherwise." Robert pulled her close. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. "I think she would," Martha agreed. "Not because I became famous or successful, but because I kept the promise I made to that 12-year-old girl. I brought the music back." In the years that followed, Martha built 17 more pianos. Each one was unique, built for a specific person or purpose, crafted with the same care and love as her first. She restored hundreds of old pianos, giving them new life and new homes. David eventually opened his own music school, though he kept teaching at the community center too. Maya became a professional pianist, performing in concert halls around the world, though she always said her foundation was built on the community center piano. The university piano became something of a legend in music education circles. Students who learned on it often spoke about how it had changed their relationship with music. Some went on to become professional musicians. Others simply carried a deeper appreciation for music into whatever careers they chose. Martha never became wealthy from her piano building. She never sought publicity or expanded into mass production. She simply continued doing what she loved, building instruments that brought music into the world, one piano at a time. On her 65th birthday, the community center threw a celebration. The room was packed with people whose lives had been touched by her work. Students who had learned on her pianos. Families whose homes now held music because of her restorations.